My name is Elena, and I'm 32 years old. 2 years ago, I lost my husband, Mark, the love of my life, to a battle with cancer he fought with impossible bravery. His parents, Margaret and Chloe, never truly recovered, and I made it my life's mission to support them, to be the rock they needed. So when they tried to secretly cancel the catering for my new wedding and steal the $100,000 I had just won, I was devastated. What they didn't know was that the world-famous chef they tried to cancel was about to walk into my living room, and he wasn't coming alone. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Before I tell you about the secret my late husband left behind to save me, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family, betrayal, and the shocking moments that change everything. Before that fateful phone call, my life was a careful balancing act, a tightrope walk between my own grief and the perceived needs of my late husband's family. I own a small but beloved bakery, the Sweetest Crumbs, a place I poured my heart into after Mark passed away. It was my sanctuary, the one place where the scent of vanilla and almond could temporarily mask the persistent ache of loss. I'm a baker. It's not just what I do, it's who I am. I find peace in the precision of a recipe, joy in the art of a perfectly piped rose. Mark had been the center of my universe for 7 wonderful years. He was a high school history teacher, a man whose passion for the past was only rivaled by his love for our future. When he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, our world shattered. But through the grueling treatments and sleepless nights, he was the one comforting me. "We build, Elena," he'd whisper, his voice thin but steady. "Even when things are falling apart, we find something beautiful to build." And so we did. We built moments of joy out of thin air, finding laughter in hospital cafeterias and celebrating small victories like a good scan or a day without pain. When he died, a part of me died with him. His family, his mother, Margaret, and his younger sister, Chloe, were understandably destroyed. Margaret, a woman who always presented a polished, stoic exterior, seemed to crumble from the inside out. Chloe, who had always been the vibrant, carefree one, became sharp and brittle. In my grief, I saw their pain as a mirror of my own, and I made a silent vow to Mark that I would take care of them, that I would be the glue that held the fractured pieces of his family together. This vow, born of love and loss, quickly became a heavy, one-sided burden. I became their unofficial financial and emotional support system. My little bakery, which was just starting to turn a profit, became their personal expense account. It started small. Margaret's car broke down a few months after the funeral. "I just don't know how I'll manage, Elena," she'd sighed over the phone, her voice thick with unshed tears. Mark always handled these things. Without a second thought, I paid the $1,200 repair bill, telling myself it's what Mark would have wanted. Then Chloe, who was perpetually between jobs after a series of failed influencer and lifestyle coach ventures, decided she needed to launch a bespoke jewelry line. She needed custom-designed sugar cookies for her launch party, 200 of them, intricately detailed with her logo. "I can't possibly afford to pay you, Ellie," she'd said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But the exposure for your bakery will be incredible." The exposure never materialized. Her business folded within a month, and I was left with the cost of ingredients and 3 sleepless nights of baking. I never saw a dime. The pattern was set. I was the fixer, the provider, the ever-present safety net. I paid for Margaret's emergency dental surgery, covered Chloe's rent when she was, unexpectedly, let go from a retail job, and catered every family gathering for free. My savings dwindled, and the dream of expanding my bakery felt further away each day. But whenever a flicker of resentment sparked within me, I would extinguish it with the memory of Mark's face. "Take care of them for me." It was a promise. They saw my generosity not as a gift, but as an obligation, a debt I owed to the memory of their son and brother. They never asked about my struggles, my loneliness, or the financial strain I was under. Our conversations revolved around them, their needs, their problems, their grief, which they wore like a shield to deflect any expectation of reciprocity. They'd often say things like, "You're so strong, Elena. We don't know how you do it." It wasn't a compliment. It was an absolution of their own responsibility to treat me as a person rather than a resource. I was strong because I had no other choice. 2 years after Mark's death, a new light entered my life. His name was Liam. He was a landscape architect I met when he was hired to design a small park next to my bakery. He was kind, patient, and saw me not as Mark's widow, not as a baker, but as Elena. He listened when I talked about Mark, his eyes filled with compassion, not pity. He made me laugh again, a deep, genuine laugh that I thought had been buried with my husband. We fell in love slowly, carefully, building something new on the foundation of our pasts. When I told Margaret and Chloe that Liam had proposed, their reaction was unsettling. I had expected relief, perhaps happiness that I had found a reason to smile again. Instead, I was met with a chilling silence. "Well," Margaret said finally, stirring her tea with meticulous slowness, "that's fast, isn't it? It feels like we just lost Mark yesterday." "I'm happy for you, I guess," Chloe added, scrolling through her phone, her tone dripping with indifference. "Just seems a bit disrespectful to Mark's memory to move on so quickly. But you have to do what makes you happy." The implication was clear. My happiness was an affront to their grief. My moving forward was a betrayal. They had grown comfortable with my role as the devoted widow, the family caretaker whose life was permanently paused in tribute to their loss. My engagement wasn't just a new chapter for me, it was the end of their unending support system. I tried to reassure them, explaining that loving Liam didn't diminish my love for Mark, that they would always be family. They smiled thin, brittle smiles, but I could see the calculation in their eyes. They weren't losing a daughter-in-law, they were losing an asset. I tried to ignore the knot of dread in my stomach. This was my chance at a new beginning, a life filled with love and hope. I focused on the wedding planning, on the joy of building a future with Liam. I told myself that Margaret and Chloe would come around, that they just needed time to adjust. I thought getting engaged would create a new, healthier boundary between us. I had no idea it would light the fuse to an explosion that would threaten to burn down everything I had left. The catalyst arrived in a crisp, cream-colored envelope, embossed with a golden whisk. It was an invitation to compete in the Golden Whisk Baking Championship, one of the most prestigious pastry competitions in the country. It was a long shot. Thousands of bakers applied every year. I had submitted my application months before, in a moment of hopeful delirium, never actually expecting to hear back. Now, here it was. I was one of 10 bakers chosen to compete for the grand prize, $100,000 and the title of Golden Whisk Champion. Liam was ecstatic. He lifted me up and spun me around my small kitchen, flour dusting his shirt. "This is it, Elena. This is your moment. You deserve this more than anyone I know." His belief in me was a fire, warming the cold corners of my self-doubt. For the first time in 2 years, a professional dream that had seemed impossible felt within reach. The prize money was life-changing. It would mean I could finally expand my bakery, hire staff, and maybe even take a real vacation with Liam. It represented a future I could build with my own 2 hands. When I shared the news with Margaret and Chloe over our weekly Sunday dinner, a dinner I, of course, had cooked, their reaction was predictably lukewarm. "Oh, a little baking show? That's cute," Chloe said, inspecting her nails. "Is it on real TV or just YouTube?" "Be careful, dear," Margaret advised, patting my hand with a condescending air. "Those things can be terribly stressful. You don't want to get your hopes up and be disappointed." There was no congratulations, no excitement for me. To them, my passion was a cute little hobby, and my ambition was a setup for failure. Their lack of faith, which once would have stung, now simply fueled my determination. I would do this for me. I would do this for Mark, who had always been my biggest cheerleader. The competition was a whirlwind. For 3 weeks, I flew back and forth to New York, juggling my bakery and the intense filming schedule. It was the most exhausting and exhilarating experience of my life. Each challenge pushed me to my creative limits. I crafted a 5-tiered cake that looked like a geode, with glistening sugar crystals spilling from its center. I made delicate macarons that tasted of lavender and honey, and a deconstructed tiramisu that earned a rare smile from the notoriously stoic head judge, the world-renowned chef Antoine Dubois. Back home, I tried to share the excitement with Margaret and Chloe, but they seemed more interested in the gossip from the set than my actual creations. As I moved from one round to the next, however, I noticed a subtle shift in their attitude. They started asking more questions, not about my baking, but about the prize money. "If you win, what's the first thing you'll do with that $100,000? Chloe asked one afternoon, her tone unnervingly casual. "I haven't really thought about it," I lied, not wanting to share my dreams with people who would only belittle them. "Probably just invested in the bakery." "You should really use it to pay off our mortgage," Margaret chimed in. "It would be such a load off our minds. It's what Mark would have wanted, to know we were secure." The suggestion was so audacious, so deeply entitled, that I was momentarily speechless. They saw my potential victory not as my achievement, but as their solution. The final round came down to me and a cocky young pastry chef from Los Angeles. The challenge was to create a cake that told a story. While he built an elaborate, flashy structure dedicated to Hollywood, I decided to do something deeply personal. I built a cake that told the story of my love for Mark. The base was a sturdy chocolate stout, his favorite. The filling was a bright lemon curd, representing the light he brought into my life. And on top, I sculpted delicate, bittersweet sugar flowers, representing the beautiful, fragile memories we built together, even in the face of his illness. I poured every ounce of my love, my grief, and my hope into that cake. Standing before the judges, I explained my creation, my voice trembling. Chef Dubois took a bite, his expression unreadable. He chewed slowly, deliberately, then set his fork down. The silence stretched for an eternity. "This cake," he said finally, his French accent making every word sound profound, "is not just a dessert. It is a testament. It is honesty, and it is heart. In my 30 years as a chef, I have rarely tasted something so true." When they announced my name as the winner, I burst into tears. It wasn't just about the money. It was the validation. It was the feeling that my hard work, my passion, my story, it all mattered. I accepted the giant novelty check, my hands shaking, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright and full of possibility. When I returned home, the shift in Margaret and Chloe was seismic. Suddenly, I wasn't the creator of a cute little hobby. I was a champion. They threw a small party for me, inviting relatives I hadn't seen in years. They toasted my success, calling me their talented daughter and brilliant sister. They posed for photos with me and the novelty check, their smiles wide and proprietary. Their sudden support felt less like pride and more like ownership. I just didn't know what, exactly, they planned to claim. The victory glow lasted less than a week. The moment the $100,000 was officially wired into my bank account, the entitlement that had been simmering beneath the surface of my in-laws' fake pride boiled over. The unmasking began not with a bang, but with a suggestion. It happened during wedding planning. Liam and I were at my dining table, surrounded by swatches and brochures, trying to decide on a venue. Margaret and Chloe had invited themselves over, ostensibly to help. "Ugh, you know, Elena," Margaret began, pushing aside a brochure for a rustic barn venue I loved. "Now that you have this windfall, you should really consider the Grand Excelsior Hotel. It's much more prestigious. It would make a statement." "The Excelsior is beautiful, Margaret, but it's nearly 3 times our budget," I said gently. "But that's the point," Chloe interjected, her eyes gleaming. "You don't have a budget anymore. You can afford the best. Think of the photos. Mark would have wanted you to have a wedding that reflected his family's standing." It was the first time they had so blatantly connected my prize money to their desires. The idea that Mark, a humble history teacher who preferred hiking boots to tuxedos, would care about family standing was laughable. But they weren't joking. They genuinely believed my money was theirs to allocate. The next incident was more direct. Chloe cornered me in the kitchen a few days later, holding a crumpled notebook. "I was going through some of Mark's old things," she said, her voice laced with manufactured emotion. "And I found this. It's a list of money he'd borrowed from Mom and Dad over the years. For his first car, college books. It all adds up. She pushed the notebook towards me. On it was a list of dubious expenses scrawled in her own handwriting, conveniently totaling just over $50,000. With interest, we figure he owed them about $75,000, she continued, her eyes fixed on me. Now that you have the means, it's only right that you settle his debts. It's a matter of family honor. I stared at her, my blood running cold. I had been with Mark through his entire adult life. I knew his finances inside and out. He had worked his way through college and had been meticulous about never being in debt to anyone, especially his parents. This was a complete fabrication, a shameless cash grab disguised as filial duty. "Chloe, that's not true," I said, my voice steady despite the fury rising in my chest. "Mark didn't owe your parents anything." Her face hardened. "Are you calling me a liar? Are you saying my brother was a deadbeat? After everything Mom and Dad did for him, for you?" The emotional blackmail was swift and vicious. When I refused to even consider it, the atmosphere in their presence became icy. My attempts to share exciting wedding updates were met with stony silence or passive-aggressive remarks. When I showed them a photo of the wedding dress, I'd chosen a simple, elegant, A-line gown. Margaret had sniffed and said, "It's very plain. I suppose it's practical." Liam, my rock through all of this, saw the toll it was taking on me. I was losing sleep, my joy about the wedding slowly being eroded by their constant pressure. One evening, after a particularly draining dinner with them where they'd spent the entire time talking about their mounting bills, Liam sat me down. "Elena, this isn't normal," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "They aren't grieving with you, they're preying on you. They don't see that prize as your success. They see you as their winning lottery ticket." He was right. Hearing him say it out loud solidified the truth I had been trying to avoid. They weren't just misguided or grieving, they were intentionally manipulative. "I need to talk to them," I said, my resolve hardening. "I need to set a clear boundary." The next day, I invited Margaret and Chloe to my bakery, hoping a neutral, public space would encourage civility. I sat them down with coffee and croissants and took a deep breath. "I love you both," I started, choosing my words carefully. "And I will always be grateful for the family Mark gave me. But we need to be clear about something. The prize money from the competition is mine. It's for my future with Liam and for my business. It is not available to pay off old mortgages or fabricated debts." The reaction was immediate and volcanic. "How dare you?" Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a theatrical display of shock. "After all we've done for you, we took you in, treated you like a daughter." "A daughter you conveniently expect to fund your lifestyle," I retorted, my patience wearing thin. "You are the most selfish, ungrateful person I have ever met." Chloe spat, her face contorted with rage. "Mark would be disgusted by you. He would be ashamed to see how you're hoarding this money instead of taking care of his family. You owe us. You owe him." The accusation that Mark would be ashamed of me was a dagger to the heart. It was their ultimate weapon, and they wielded it without mercy. I realized then that a rational conversation was impossible. Their sense of entitlement was so profound that they had rewritten reality to fit their narrative. In their minds, I was the villain, a greedy widow disrespecting her late husband's memory. The final straw wasn't about money, but about something far more sacred. Liam and I had decided we wanted to honor Mark in our wedding ceremony. We planned to have an empty chair with a single white rose and to light a candle in his memory. It was a small, quiet gesture that was deeply meaningful to me. When I mentioned it to Margaret, her response left me breathless. "An empty chair? Elena, that's morbid," she said with a look of distaste. "A wedding is supposed to be a happy occasion. You can't bring that kind of sadness into it. It will make the guests uncomfortable. It will make us uncomfortable." She wanted to erase him. She wanted to scrub his memory from my new celebration of love because it was inconvenient for her. The man whose name she invoked constantly when demanding money was suddenly a morbid downer when it came to a genuine act of remembrance. It was in that moment that I finally saw them for who they were, completely and irrevocably. Their grief wasn't a wound, it was a tool. Mark's memory wasn't a treasure, it was currency. They didn't love him for who he was. They loved him for what he, and now I, could provide. I set a firm boundary then, telling them the memorial gesture was non-negotiable. Their smiles vanished, and what replaced them was a coldness that chilled me to the bone. They had lost their leverage, and their feigned affection disappeared with it. I thought that was the worst of it, that they would simply retreat into sullen disapproval. I was wrong. I had drawn a line in the sand, and they were about to cross it with a bulldozer. After the boundary-setting conversation, a tense but blessedly quiet period followed. Margaret and Chloe ceased their financial demands, communicating only in clipped, formal tones when necessary. It was an uncomfortable truce, but I welcomed the silence. With their suffocating influence lifted, the joy of wedding planning returned. Liam and I finalized our plans, a sense of happy anticipation finally eclipsing the dread that had clouded the past few weeks. The centerpiece of our reception was to be the food. As a baker, my standards were high, and I wanted a culinary experience that reflected our love story. Creative, heartfelt, and made with impeccable ingredients. There was only one choice for me: Chef Antoine Dubois. After the competition, he had graciously given me his card and told me to call if I ever needed anything. On a whim, I reached out to his catering company. To my astonishment, he remembered me, and, citing his admiration for my passion and integrity, he offered to personally oversee our wedding menu at a generous discount. It felt like a dream come true. Having a chef of his caliber involved was a validation of everything I'd worked for. I made the mistake of sharing this exciting news with my in-laws. I thought, perhaps naively, that even they couldn't find fault with such a wonderful development. Chloe's eyes narrowed with jealousy. Margaret's smile was tight and thin. "Antoine Dubois?" Margaret said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Isn't he terribly expensive, even with a discount? It seems extravagant, Elena, especially when there are so many more practical uses for that money." "The catering is my gift to Liam and me," I said firmly, refusing to be drawn into another argument. "And it's already booked and paid for." That, I thought, was the end of it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon, less than 3 weeks before the wedding. I was in my bakery, humming along to the radio as I put the finishing touches on a batch of raspberry macarons. My phone rang, displaying the number for Chef Dubois' administrative office. "Hello, this is Elena," I answered cheerfully. "Hi, Elena. This is Sarah from Dubois Catering," a polite voice said. "I'm just calling to confirm the cancellation of your catering services for the wedding on October 22nd. We've gone ahead and processed the refund to your credit card, though it may take 5 to 7 business days to appear." The piping bag slipped from my hand, leaving a smear of pink buttercream on the stainless steel counter. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I'm sorry," I stammered, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. "Cancellation? I didn't cancel anything." Oh, Sarah said, a note of confusion in her voice. "That's strange. We received a call about an hour ago from you. You said that due to a family financial emergency, you were having an emotional crisis and needed to cancel all non-essential wedding services immediately." An emotional crisis, a financial emergency. The words were a venomous echo of the manipulations they had used for years. It couldn't be. They wouldn't. Who did you speak with?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She said her name was Elena Preston. She sounded very distraught," Sarah explained. "She knew all the details of your contract, the date, the venue. She even referenced your win at the Golden Whisk competition as the source of the financial trouble, saying the tax implications were more than you could handle." The lie was so intricate, so malicious. They had not only impersonated me, but had also twisted my greatest professional achievement into a liability. They had painted me as an unstable, financially incompetent person falling apart at the seams. "Sarah, I can assure you that was not me," I said, my voice gaining strength from a surge of pure adrenaline. "There has been a terrible mistake. Please, do not cancel my contract." "Of course," she said, her tone shifting to one of serious concern. "I'll put a hold on the cancellation immediately and make a note of this fraudulent call. I'll have Chef Dubois call you personally later today." Uh, I hung up the phone, my hands shaking so violently I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated act of sabotage. They hadn't just disagreed with my choice, they had actively tried to destroy it. They had impersonated me, lied about my mental and financial state, and attempted to snatch away the one part of my wedding that felt truly and uniquely mine. Why? The reason hit me with sickening clarity. It wasn't just about control, it was about the money. By canceling the extravagant chef, they would create a crisis, forcing me into a corner. Then they would swoop in with their solution, a cheaper, mediocre caterer friend of a friend, allowing them to argue that the significant leftover funds from my catering budget should go to them to help out. It was the most profoundly violating thing I had ever experienced. They hadn't just attacked my wedding, they had attacked my identity, my competence, and my sanity. The line had been crossed, shattered, and left in the dust. My grief for Mark had blinded me to their true nature for too long. My desire for family had made me a willing participant in my own diminishment, but no more. The patient, accommodating, ever-giving Elena was gone. In her place was a woman who had been pushed too far. In that moment, I knew there was no reasoning with them. This wasn't a family dispute. This was war. And they had no idea I was about to bring out a weapon they never knew existed. That evening, I told Liam everything. I broke down completely, the fury and the violation pouring out of me in a torrent of tears. He held me, his arms a safe harbor in the storm, and listened without interruption. When I finished, his face was grim, his usual easygoing expression replaced by a protective anger that I found incredibly comforting. "That's it," he said, his voice low and firm. "We're done, Elena." Done being polite. Done giving them the benefit of the doubt. "I know," I whispered, wiping my eyes. "But what do we do? How do I fight this?" And then I remembered. A memory, hazy from the fog of early grief, surfaced in my mind. It was a few weeks before Mark died. He was weak, confined to his bed, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He had asked me to bring him the old wooden box from the back of his closet. "If I'm not here," he had said, his voice raspy, "and they ever truly cross a line, Elena, a real line, you'll know it when you see it. When that happens, I want you to open this." He had looked at me with such intensity, such love and worry. "Promise me." I had promised, dismissing it at the time as the ramblings of a sick man. In the chaos after his death, I had forgotten all about the box. Now I knew. A line had been crossed. "There's something Mark left for me," I told Liam, a new sense of purpose cutting through my despair. I think it's time to see what it is." The box was tucked away on the top shelf of the guest room closet, covered in a thin layer of dust. It was a simple, unadorned maple box he had made in high school woodshop. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, were two items. A thick, sealed envelope with my name on it in Mark's familiar, slanted handwriting, and a small, silver USB flash drive. I opened the letter first. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means they have finally done something unforgivable. I am so sorry. I'm sorry I'm not there to protect you from them. I spent so much of my life trying to manage their expectations, trying to be the good son and good brother, that I didn't see how their toxicity was poisoning us until it was too late. They don't love people, Ellie. They consume them. They consumed me with their guilt and their demands, and after I was gone, I knew they would try to consume you. You, with your beautiful, generous heart, are a feast to them. I cannot change who they are, but I can give you the truth. The flash drive in this box contains a video. It's my testimony. I recorded it a few weeks ago. It contains my final wishes, not for my possessions, those are all yours, unequivocally, but for your life. Please, watch it. Use it. Do not let them dim your light. Your talent, your love, your future, it is all yours. Don't let them convince you that you owe them any part of it. My only debt is to you, for all the happiness you gave me. Live freely, my love. Build something beautiful. Yours always? Mark. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter to my chest. It was his final gift to me. Not just his love, but his permission. Permission to fight back. Permission to be free. With Liam beside me, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. Mark's face filled the screen. He looked tired, the illness having taken its toll, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Hello, Elena," he began, his voice weak but resolute. "If you're watching this, I hope it gives you the strength to do what I was always too weak to do. Set a final boundary." For the next 15 minutes, Mark spoke directly to the camera, detailing a lifetime of emotional and financial manipulation at the hands of his mother and sister. He spoke of how they guilted him into paying for Chloe's college tuition, which she then dropped out of. He revealed that they had pressured him to co-sign on a car loan for their father before he passed, a loan they defaulted on, ruining Mark's credit for years. He described the constant belittling of his career choice. Just a teacher? When you could have been a lawyer. And the way they dismissed me when we first started dating, calling me a simple baker who wasn't ambitious enough for him. He ended with a direct message. "Mom, Chloe, I love you. But your love has always come with a price tag I can no longer pay. Elena owes you nothing. She has given you more grace and support than you ever gave me. Her success is her own. Her future is her own. Let her go." The video ended. The room was silent, save for my own quiet sobs. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a shield. It was the truth. In Mark's own words. A plan began to form in my mind, sharp and clear. I wasn't just going to rebook the caterer. I was going to set a trap. They wanted to humiliate me, to paint me as unstable. I was going to expose them for the calculated, greedy people they truly were. The next morning, I called Chef Antoine Dubois. I explained the entire situation, the impersonation, the financial demands, the history of manipulation. I told him about the letter and the video. He listened patiently, his occasional "I see" and "Mon Dieu," a rumbling counterpoint to my story. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "Madam Preston," he said finally, his voice devoid of its usual television warmth, replaced by a cold fury. "In my world, integrity is everything. The integrity of ingredients, the integrity of a recipe, and the integrity of one's character. What your in-laws have done is an offense to all three. It is not just a family matter. They have committed fraud against my business and slandered your name. This I cannot abide. I have a plan," I said, my voice steady. "But I need your help." I laid it all out. I would call a family meeting under the guise of discussing the wedding budget and catering options now that his services were canceled. I would let them walk right into the trap, believing they had won. And then, at the height of their hubris, I needed him to be there. "I will not just be there, madame," Chef Dubois declared. "I will bring a copy of the call recording from my office and a bill for the reputational damage. Consider me your ally. They have insulted a fellow artist. They will find that has consequences." The stage was set. That afternoon, I called my mother-in-law. My voice was shaky and tearful, a performance I was surprised to find came easily after years of placating them. I told her she was right, that I had overreacted and was in over my head financially. I needed her and Chloe's help to sort out the wedding budget. "Of course, dear," Margaret purred, the false sympathy dripping from her voice. "We'll be right over tomorrow afternoon. We'll help you fix everything." They thought they were coming to finalize their victory, to pick over the scraps of my canceled dreams. They were walking into an ambush. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the thrill of taking back control. The following afternoon, my house was a silent stage. The air was thick with anticipation. Liam stood by the fireplace, his presence a quiet promise of support. On the coffee table, a laptop was strategically placed, ready to play Mark's final message. My hands were steady. The fear and hurt from the day before had crystallized into a diamond-hard resolve. At precisely 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Margaret and Chloe swept in, their faces a perfect blend of feigned concern and triumphant smugness. Chloe was already scrolling through websites for cheap buffet caterers on her phone. Margaret was carrying a leather-bound planner, ready to orchestrate my finances. "Oh, Elena, you poor thing," Margaret said, pulling me into a cold, papery hug. Don't you worry. We're here now. We'll sort out this mess you've gotten yourself into. We found a wonderful caterer who does a lovely taco bar. Chloe chimed in, not looking up from her screen. Very budget, friendly. You'll have tens of thousands left over to handle your situation. And I led them to the living room and gestured for them to sit on the sofa opposite me and Liam. Thank you for coming, I began, my voice even. Before we talk about new caterers, I want to understand what happened. I'm still a bit confused about the cancellation. Margaret launched into their rehearsed narrative. Dear, we had to intervene. We heard the panic in your voice when you called us. You were talking about taxes, about being overwhelmed. We knew you wouldn't be able to bring yourself to cancel, so we took that burden on for you. It was an act of love. We were protecting you from yourself, Chloe added, finally pocketing her phone and adopting a serious expression. Sometimes family has to make the tough decisions. I let them talk. Let them spin their web of lies and self-congratulation. They spoke of their deep concern for my well-being, their desire to honor Mark's memory by ensuring I was secure, and their grand plans to manage the prize money on my behalf, investing it wisely and giving me a small allowance until I was more stable. It was a masterful performance. When they had finally finished, a smug silence settled over the room. They looked at me expectantly, waiting for my gratitude, for my surrender. I leaned forward and gave them a small, sad smile. That's an interesting story, I said softly. A very detailed one, but I think Mark had a different one. The smiles froze on their faces. What are you talking about? Margaret asked, her voice suddenly sharp. Mark knew, I said, my voice growing stronger. He knew who you were. He knew what you would do when he was gone, and he left me something. A final message. I think you should see it. Before they could protest, I turned the laptop around and pressed play. Mark's face filled the screen. The sound of his voice, weak but clear, echoed through the silent room. Mom, Chloe, I love you, but your love has always come with a price tag. I watched their faces as Mark's testimony unfolded. The color drained from Margaret's cheeks, her mask of maternal concern melting away to reveal raw, ugly shock. Chloe's jaw went slack, her eyes wide with disbelief and horror. They were not just seeing Mark. They were hearing the truth, a truth they had spent a lifetime burying under layers of guilt and manipulation. When the video detailed how they had ruined his credit, Chloe flinched as if struck. When he spoke of their dismissal of me, Margaret's teacup rattled in its saucer. The video ended. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Margaret's ragged breathing. That's a lie, she whispered, her voice trembling. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. You poisoned him against us. He was dying, Liam said, his voice like cold steel. And he was seeing everything with perfect clarity for the first time. As Chloe opened her mouth to argue, to spin another lie, the doorbell rang, sharp and imperious. Their heads snapped towards the door, confused. I stood up calmly. I believe that's for you. I opened the door to reveal Chef Antoine Dubois. He was dressed not in his chef's whites, but in a perfectly tailored dark suit. He looked every bit the formidable businessman he was, and his expression was thunderous. He stepped into the room, his eyes immediately locking on to the two women on the sofa. Good afternoon, he said, his accent sharp and clipped. I am Antoine Dubois. I believe one of you impersonated my client, Elena Preston, in a fraudulent attempt to cancel my company's services. And Fruquoit. Margaret and Chloe looked as if they had seen a ghost. They were speechless. I have here, Chef Dubois continued, pulling a small digital recorder from his pocket. A recording of the phone call my office received yesterday. In it, a woman claiming to be Miss Preston cites emotional distress and financial ruin as her reason for cancellation. He pressed a button, and a tinny, distorted version of Margaret's voice filled the room. An emotional crisis. Must cancel all non-essential services. He clicked it off. You not only committed fraud, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, but you slandered the name of a talented artist and a woman I am proud to call a colleague. My legal team is very interested in this. This is not a family squabble. This is a criminal offense. Margaret made a small, choking sound. So, I said, stepping forward and taking back control of the room. Let's be clear. There is no confusion. There is no misunderstanding. There are only your actions. I looked directly at them, the two women who had tried to break me. You used my grief. You tried to steal my success. You tried to sabotage my future. You impersonated me. You did all of this while claiming to love the man whose memory you were actively desecrating. I took a deep breath. The money is mine. The wedding will proceed as planned, with Chef Dubois' exquisite food. But there has been one small change to the guest list. As I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. You are no longer invited. You will not be at my wedding. You will not receive another cent from me. Ever. This is where Mark's obligation, and mine, ends. No, I think you should leave my house. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of fury, humiliation, and utter defeat. Stripped of their lies, with their scheme exposed by an internationally famous chef, they had nothing left. For the first time, they were utterly powerless. Without another word, Margaret and Chloe stood up, their movements stiff and robotic. They walked out of my house, past the formidable figure of Chef Dubois, and out of my life. Watching them leave, stripped of their power and their masks, I didn't feel hatred, I felt free. But I knew the hardest part, building a life without the shadows of the past, was just beginning. The moment the front door clicked shut behind them, the silence they left behind was not empty. It was full. It was full of peace, of oxygen, of possibility. It was as if the atmospheric pressure in the house, which I had been carrying in my own chest for 2 long years, had finally normalized. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since Mark died, and my shoulders, which I hadn't known were clenched tight up to my ears, finally dropped. Liam's hand found mine, his warm grip a grounding anchor in the sudden calm. Chef Dubois turned to me, his stern, businessman facade melting away to reveal the artist underneath. The thunder in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, professional respect. "Are you all right, Madame Preston?" he asked, his voice now gentle, the sharp edges gone. "I am now, Chef," I said, and a real, watery smile I couldn't contain spread across my face. "Thank you. I can't tell you what your support today means to me. You didn't have to do that." "Oh, an artist must protect another artist," he said with a decisive nod, his gaze sweeping over my living room, my sanctuary that had just been a battlefield. "And besides," he added, a twinkle returning to his eye, "nobody cancels my catering and gets away with it. It is bad for business. Now, we have a wedding menu to confirm, and the matter is settled. I am thinking a croquembouche, yes? A tower of triumph. It is the only appropriate centerpiece for such a victory." He left shortly after, leaving behind not just the promise of an incredible wedding feast, but a feeling of profound validation from a peer I admired more than words could say. That night, Liam and I didn't talk about them. We didn't rehash the confrontation or speculate about their next move. Instead, we sat on our porch, drinking wine and talking about our future, our real future, for the first time without a single shadow of obligation hanging over us. It felt like the first day of the rest of my life. In the weeks that followed, a profound sense of lightness settled over me. Cutting ties with Margaret and Chloe was like removing a splinter that had been festering deep under my skin for years. The pain of the extraction was sharp and intense, but the clean, healing relief that followed was immense. The joy of wedding planning, once a source of constant stress and second-guessing, became the delightful, collaborative process it was always meant to be. Liam and I chose flowers, finalized our vows, and tasted cake my own, of course, without the acidic filter of their judgment. We joyfully added a s'mores bar to the reception, a fun, casual touch I knew Margaret would have deemed utterly common. The decision felt like a small, sweet rebellion. The news of the showdown spread through the extended family like wildfire. My phone, which had been silent for weeks, began to ring. It was my Aunt Carol first, Mark's aunt, a woman who had always been kind but had kept her distance, likely to avoid Margaret's drama. "Elena, honey," I just heard from your cousin Susan what happened, she said, her voice filled with a warmth that made my eyes well up. I'm just calling to say, good for you. It's about time someone stood up to them. We all saw how they treated you, like a walking bank account after Mark passed. We're so proud of you for finding your strength. That one phone call opened the floodgates. One by one, other relatives reached out, sharing their own stories of Margaret's control and Chloe's entitlement. Their validation was a balm on the raw wounds of self-doubt my in-laws had so expertly inflicted. I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't been too sensitive. I had been a victim of a long-standing, toxic dynamic that everyone saw but no one had dared to name. Of course, Margaret and Chloe attempted a desperate smear campaign. I received a single venomous text from Chloe the night after the confrontation. Enjoy your blood money. Mark would be ashamed of the monster you've become. You'll be sorry when you're all alone. I read it, took a deep breath, and deleted it without replying. That simple act, the choice not to engage, not to defend myself, was a declaration of my freedom. Her words had no power over me anymore. They tried to spin a narrative of a cruel, money-obsessed widow, but Mark's video, which I shared with Aunt Carol and a few other trusted relatives, was an irrefutable truth that dismantled their lies completely. The most immediate consequence for them was the one they understood best: financial. Without my constant subsidies to patch the holes in their leaky budgets, their carefully constructed lifestyle began to crumble. I heard through the grapevine that Margaret had to put her house on the market, downsizing to a small condo she could actually afford. Chloe, for the first time in her adult life, was forced to get a full-time job, a position as a receptionist at a car dealership. The universe, it seemed, had its own way of balancing the books. Our wedding day was perfect. Not magazine perfect, but perfectly us. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and the rustic barn was filled with golden light and the sound of authentic, uninhibited laughter. It was a smaller affair than my in-laws would have demanded, but every single person there was present because they genuinely loved and supported us. The empty chair for Mark, adorned with a single white rose, was a poignant and beautiful tribute, not a source of morbidity. It felt like he was there, a quiet, loving presence blessing our union. As I stood with Liam, saying my vows, I felt his memory not as a weight, but as a foundation. The reception was a joyous, unpretentious celebration of life, love, and the most incredible food I have ever tasted. Chef Dubois had outdone himself, and his croquembouche was indeed a tower of triumph. As he personally served Liam and me our first course, he leaned in and whispered, "To the next chapter, Elena. May it be as sweet and as strong as your desserts." That night, as Liam and I had our first dance under a canopy of fairy lights, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced since before Mark first got sick. I was no longer defined by loss. I was no longer a widow, a caretaker, or a resource to be plundered. I was a wife, a business owner, a champion, a woman standing on her own 2 feet in a life she had chosen and built for herself. I had walked through the fire of their betrayal, and instead of being burned, I had been forged anew. 18 months after our wedding, I stood in the bright, bustling space of my new bakery, a place I had named, fittingly, The Next Chapter. The sign above the door, painted in an elegant, sweeping gold script, was a daily reminder of my journey. The air inside was a symphony of my favorite smells: the deep, rich aroma of freshly ground coffee, the sweet perfume of almond extract from a batch of financiers, and the comforting scent of yeasted dough rising slowly, patiently, in the warmth of the proofer. After the wedding, I had taken the leap. I used a significant portion of the prize money to move my little shop from its cramped, hidden location to this beautiful, sunlit space on a main street with huge windows that looked out onto the city. Life was not just different. It was a different reality altogether. The bakery was a resounding success. We had a proper cafe section with cozy armchairs, a gleaming open kitchen where customers could watch the magic happen, and a team of 3 amazing young pastry chefs I had hired and was mentoring. We were featured in the local paper, acclaimed for our innovative cakes and the genuine warmth of our atmosphere. More importantly, I had launched the Sweet Futures program, a free weekly baking workshop for underprivileged youth in our community. Seeing a teenager's face light up after successfully piping a perfect rosette on their first cupcake gave me a sense of purpose that no amount of money ever could. I was building something beautiful and lasting, just as Mark had wished for me. My life with Liam had settled into the kind of deep, comfortable love that is built not on grand gestures, but on 1,000 small, daily acts of partnership. Our home was our shared sanctuary, filled with his ever-expanding collection of plants, and the sound of my stand mixer humming in the kitchen on a Sunday morning. He was my biggest cheerleader and my wisest counsel, the person who celebrated my successes as if they were his own, and who knew, just by the look in my eyes, when I needed to put down my whisk and just be held. The justice served to Margaret and Chloe was not the swift, dramatic downfall of a movie. It was a more realistic, and perhaps more profound form of justice. The slow, quiet, inevitable confrontation with the true consequences of their character. The reverse mortgage had allowed Margaret to stay in her house, but as Aunt Carol had told me, the place had become a gilded cage. She was house poor, living on a fixed income with no buffer for the emergencies she had once outsourced to me. Her social life, once her entire world, had withered. Many of her old friends, loyal to the memory of Mark and disgusted by her actions, had quietly and politely faded away. Aunt Carol described visiting her once and finding the immaculate house eerily silent, the polished surfaces reflecting a life that had become hollowed out from the inside. She was left with nothing but her pride, which I imagine was a cold companion. Chloe's life had undergone an even more radical transformation. The harsh reality of a 9-to-5 receptionist job at a car dealership was a relentless shock to her system. The glamour of being a self-proclaimed influencer was replaced by the mundane reality of answering phones, scheduling oil changes, and dealing with angry customers. Without my financial backing, her lifestyle of boutique shopping, expensive brunches, and unpaid credit card bills was over. She had been forced to trade her trendy, overpriced apartment for a smaller, more practical one in a neighborhood she once would have sneered at. She had been forced, in short, to become an adult, a transition for which she was woefully unprepared. For nearly a year and a half, I maintained my boundary of no direct contact. Then, on a crisp autumn afternoon, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was Chloe. My finger hovered over the delete button, a reflexive act of self-protection. But a deeper, calmer part of me was curious. I opened it. The email was short, and its humility was so uncharacteristic that it felt like reading a letter from a stranger. Subject: Your lemon curd recipe. Elena, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, and you have every reason to ignore this. I've spent the last year thinking about what I did. I was a terrible sister-in-law, and a selfish, awful person. I've been going to therapy. It's hard. It's forcing me to look at things I don't want to see about myself, about our family. It's helping, I think. That's not why I'm writing. Mom's birthday is next week. She's been quiet, not herself. I know she put on a brave face, but she's lonely. I remember how much she loved that lemon tart you used to make, the one with the tall, toasted meringue. You made it for Mark's last birthday, and it was the only thing she ate that day. I was wondering if you would be willing to share the recipe. I want to try and make it for her. I know a cake can't fix years of being terrible, but I want to try and do something nice for her, something that comes from me, something that doesn't involve asking for money. It's absolutely okay if you say no, or if you don't reply at all. I completely understand. Chloe. I read the email 3 times, dissecting every word. The old Elena would have seen a trap, but the woman I was now saw something else, a glimmer of genuine change. She wasn't asking for me to bake the cake. She was asking for the instructions. She wasn't asking for a handout. She was offering her own effort as a peace offering. It was the first selfless thing I had ever known her to do. I didn't reply immediately. I let it sit for a day, discussing it with Liam that night. What do you think? I asked, still torn. Is this a Trojan horse? I don't think so, he said, taking my hand. I think it's a white flag. But that doesn't mean you have to let her into your fortress. People can change, Ellie. The real question is, what are you comfortable with? The boundaries are yours, and they are non-negotiable. He was right. My healing had brought me to a place where I could look at this not as a threat, but as a choice I was now strong enough to make. The next morning, I typed out a reply. I opened a new document and wrote out my lemon curd recipe from scratch, adding in the little notes and tips that made it special. Whisk the eggs in sugar until they form pale ribbons. Fold, don't stir, the meringue. I saved it as a PDF and attached it to the email, but I added a few sentences of my own at the end. Chloe, here is the recipe. The secret is to use fresh lemons and not to overbake the crust. I hope it turns out well for you. I'm genuinely glad to hear you're in therapy and doing the work. I wish you and your mother a peaceful birthday. This doesn't erase what happened, and it doesn't change the boundaries I have in place, but I appreciate you reaching out in a way that respects them. Elena? I hit send. It wasn't an act of forgiveness, not completely. It wasn't an open invitation back into my life. It was a small, carefully measured act of grace. It was me, acknowledging a flicker of light in someone I had only known to be darkness. It was a recognition that everyone has the capacity to change, but that the path to redemption is one they must walk alone. One humble, homemade tart at a time. It was the closing of one chapter and the cautious, quiet, and hopeful turning of a page to another. Looking back on the whirlwind of the last few years, it's so easy to see the dramatic, cinematic moments, the giant novelty check from the competition, the chilling discovery of Mark's video, the climactic confrontation with an internationally renowned chef as my unlikely avenger. Those were the turning points, the explosive scenes that irrevocably changed the plot of my life. But the real story, the real lasting lesson, wasn't forged in the fire of that confrontation. It was discovered in the quiet, peaceful moments that followed. The gentle hum of my new convection ovens at dawn, the easy, unburdened laughter shared with Liam over a simple weeknight dinner, the profound and simple peace of locking the front door to a home that was truly mine, a sanctuary I had fought for, bled for, and finally won. For so long after Mark died, I had chained myself to a distorted definition of honor. I believed that honoring his memory meant sacrificing my own happiness at the altar of his family's demands. I thought that taking care of them, no matter the staggering personal cost, was the ultimate act of love and loyalty. It was a quiet, creeping martyrdom. I carried their needs, their wants, their endless crises on my back like a penance, convincing myself that my own dreams of a bigger bakery, of a new love, of a life beyond grief, were a selfish indulgence in the face of their loss. I had allowed them to define my worth entirely through the lens of my utility to them. Was I a good baker? Yes, but only because I could provide free desserts for their parties. Was I a good, grieving daughter-in-law? Yes, but only because I could be counted on to pay their bills without question. In the process, I had forgotten how to be just Elena, a person with her own hopes, her own talents, her own intrinsic value, completely separate from what I could give to other people. Mark's final gift to me, I now realize, wasn't the shield of his video or the truth contained in his letter. His greatest and most enduring gift was his permission. He gave me permission to see his family not as the idealized figures of mother and sister, but as the complex, flawed, and ultimately harmful people they were. He gave me permission to choose my own happiness over their comfort, to build my own future instead of endlessly patching up their broken pasts, and to fiercely protect my own heart. He taught me that the most profound way to honor a love that you've lost is not to remain a frozen monument to what was, but to take the strength and the lessons from that love and use them to build a joyful, meaningful future. His love didn't demand that I become a martyr. It demanded that I be free. This entire ordeal taught me the most difficult and necessary lesson of my adult life: the power and the price of boundaries. I used to think of boundaries as hostile things, as walls you build to keep people out. I see now that they are not walls at all. They are gates. They are carefully constructed gates with locks and peepholes, and you and only you get to decide who gets a key. You decide who you let in, and more importantly, what behaviors you allow them to bring into your sacred space. For years, my gate was not just unlocked. It was wide open. I let their toxicity, their entitlement, their constant negativity come in and trample all over the garden of my life. Learning to close that gate, to lock it, and to say through the peephole, "You can come this far, but no further," was not an act of cruelty. It was a radical act of self-preservation. It was me, finally, declaring that my peace, my stability, my dreams, and my well-being mattered. It was me finally understanding that you cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And through losing one family, I learned what it truly means to build another. Family isn't just about shared blood or a last name on a marriage certificate. It is a verb. It is in the doing. It's in the showing up when life is hard. It's in the championing of dreams, no matter how small. It's in the celebrating, the protecting, the honest, difficult conversations. Liam, with his unwavering support, became my family. My friends at the bakery, who covered my shifts without complaint while I was competing, became my family. Aunt Carol, who broke ranks to tell me she was proud of me, became my family. Even Chef Dubois, in his own formidable way, acted like family, defending my honor when my own blood relatives wouldn't. The family I was born into, and the family I married into, had taught me a painful lesson in what family shouldn't be. But the family I chose, the one I actively built around me, taught me what it truly is: a circle of mutual support, not a one-way chain of obligation. My success with the next chapter will never be just a financial victory to me. It is a profound, personal one. The prize money was the seed, but the bakery was built with my own resilience, my own talent, my own sweat, and my own tears. It stands as a daily, fragrant reminder that my skills are not a cute little hobby. They are a profession, a passion, and a powerful engine for creating the life I not only want, but deserve. It is a living, breathing testament to the fact that your worth is not determined by how others treat you or value you, but by how you choose to value yourself. To anyone out there watching this who feels trapped in a toxic family dynamic, who feels like your kindness is seen as a weakness and your generosity is being treated as an endless resource, please hear me when I say this. Your happiness is not a debt you owe to anyone. Your success is not a community fund for those who refuse to build their own. Setting a boundary will be one of the hardest things you ever do. It may feel like you are starting a war, but I promise you, it is often the only path to true, lasting peace. It is scary, it is painful, and you will almost certainly be called selfish, ungrateful, or cruel by the very people who have benefited from your lack of boundaries. But protecting your peace, your energy, and your future is the most important and sacred job you will ever have. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and for your future, is to walk away from the people who refuse to see your worth. What about you? Have you ever had to make that difficult choice? To protect your own happiness from a family obligation that was crushing you? Have you ever reached a breaking point? A moment so clarifying that it forced you to set a boundary you never thought you had the strength to build? I would love to hear your stories, your struggles, and your wisdom in the comments below. Your experience could be the beacon of validation that someone else desperately needs to see today, to know they are not alone. And if this story resonated with you, if it touched a part of your own journey, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that they have the absolute right to build their own next chapter. Thank you for listening. And please, remember, you are the author, the editor, and the publisher of your own life story. Don't ever let anyone else hold the pen.